So LaTia McNeely-Sandiford. So she's our first speaker, and she's the call of action here. We want to deputize everybody to go out and be our best social work selves and have these conversations about race. So LaTia has been a dynamic force in her career. She's done quite a bit. And we're also proud to say she's a graduate of our School of Social Work. She is the founder and executive producer of Lions Vision Productions. She's the author of the book Burdens in My Backpack. In her career spanning over 20 years, she's been an executive director and director of nonprofit organizations, a coach, a mentor, a role model, a highly sought speaker, and a fierce champion for women's issues. She is a social worker who embodies the call to action that is the mission for this conference. Please welcome LaTia McNeely-Sandiford.
Good morning, Rutgers. I'm super excited to be here this morning. I need to first give a couple of thank yous myself. Oh, I'm sorry, my assistant said, stand, don't say anything for 10 seconds.
Looking good.
Got it? Thank you. First and foremost, I want to say I have a couple of thank yous of my own. One, back in November, I met with Erin Capone. Erin and I had a wonderful conversation about how to work together. Me being a former student, and she working in the School of Social Work, and what can we do to make this journey a more realistic one for the ones coming after me. And she committed to some things, and I committed to some things, and we committed to working together as an alumni. And I have to say, I thank you for that. She's come through in everything she said she was going to do, and I've come through in everything I said that I was going to do. And now we're working together to produce something wonderful for you all. So thank you, Erin. Also, thank you, Doug, for having me and communicating and going back and forth. I'm super excited for this particular topic because it's not an easy one. It's not an easy one. But this job, this profession, is not an easy one. This is not the, work is over at 5 o'clock profession. This is it's in my soul. I'm thinking about it at night. I'm thinking about the families. I'm thinking about the kids. I'm thinking about the policies. I got to meet my numbers. So this is not the soft heart conversation. And race is difficult no matter what environment you're in, no matter who's presenting the information and who's listening. It's a difficult conversation to have. So I want to preface my discussion with you on this morning with stating that I understand that at moments people are going to be uncomfortable because it is an uncomfortable conversation. But the fact that we're even here convened together and even open to having it with this particular group of people say that we are headed in the right direction, okay? So I just wanted to, I want to say that before I start. I wasn't on the committee that decided to talk about racial disparity in the profession, greater the world. But had I been on the committee, I probably would have said, we can't have a discussion about racial disparity in the profession of social work before we talk about race in America. We can't have a discussion about racial disparity before we talk about racial disparity in America. So where are we? Where are we really? Let's see. We're about 2 years away from the 400th commemoration of Africans coming to this country in Virginia, 1619. 1619, 1863, under President Lincoln, we signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed slaves, ended 244 years of slavery. I'm not going to go through each of these. I want to say this. If you want a copy of this presentation, sign my mailing list and you can get it. I'm going to go through it, but I need to kind of I need to show you where we are really. We went through a 2-year period of the Civil War, which ended in about 1865. 12 years of Reconstruction era brought forth the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. The Reconstruction era is the most important time in Black history. Amendment 13, 14, 15, 13 freed the slaves, 14 protected the rights of those who were, 15 voting rights. I need you to know that information. It's important because you are the ones that are going to be championing this movement next, now. The Great Compromise of 1877 brought about Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws, as you know, segregated the South. It segregated the South, but we are still today living in a form of this era. And I need you to understand that. It's pertinent that you understand that. So we went through 100 years of Jim Crow. Jim Crow ended in about 1965, okay? Dr. King was assassinated in 68. Fair Housing Act passed in 68, roughly. Affirmative action, 1969, 1970, okay? So we're at affirmative action. Which means, technically, Black people have been 100% free for about 47 years. That's not a long time. So when we're having the race discussion, and I know you've been in environments and you've heard it. I know I've been in environments where I've heard it. Why can't they get over it? Why can't we move past it? Are we still talking about race? Yes. Because technically, 47 years is not a long time. It's not a long time. So we're still fresh in it, and a lot of what's going on today is reminiscent of it. And that's what we're here to talk about. That's what we're here to uncover. We have to unmask it. We have to get to a point where we are accepting and acknowledging that this is what it is. We cannot forget it. We can't act like it didn't happen. We have to acknowledge it and identify ways to move on and to build forward. Right? Why is this important? Why is this important? Well, because the systemic denial of access oppressed Black people economically, which laid the foundation for poverty. You can't talk about race in America or racial disparity without talking about poverty, and vice versa. Fast forward, Rockefeller drug laws. Rockefeller drug laws. The Rockefeller drug laws mandated sentencing for what we now know was disproportionately Black people, Blacks and Latinos. For low-level drug offenses, they were doing numbers like murderers, 15, 20, 30 years, minimums. So that's generation, that's 10 years out of your, that's 10 years out of 10 years out of the community, that's 10 years out of your kids' lives, that's 10 years out of the workforce, that's 10 years without an income, that's 10 years. 10 years is 10 years. Mass incarceration. Mass incarceration. We're still here. We're still having this discussion. Then, there. Now, here. It hasn't changed all that much. When you look into the system of it, it has not changed. One of the things that is absolutely important for you to understand is because race is not in and of itself a group issue. It is the foundation of the country by which we live in. So everything formed in this country comes from an undertone of race. What is that lens? What was the lens at the time is what you have to ask yourself. Because a lot of times those policies, those resources, the way that the structural integrity of programs and services, they come through that era. So it's not surprising that 40, 50 years later, we're still having the same arguments, because we're still, in a lot of ways, looking through the old lens. So Rockefeller drug laws, pardon me, as a result, mandatory minimums removed minority men from the home. Women became the head of the household. Children were left with no male role models, authority figures, and as a result, you have what is now the aftermath. Their kids and their kids' kids who are traumatized, who are lost, who are resentful, who are angry. Right? Is this what you see in your practice? There's a reason for it. I don't care, and you'll learn more about me as I go on. I don't care as a child what your environment is, whether it be chaotic, dysfunctional, abusive, doesn't matter. You learn as a child to adapt in that environment. Really quickly, I'm going to tell you more about me later, but just for this moment, I was born into an environment where both my parents were heroin addicts. They were young. Side note, despite what it looks like, now we have the war on heroin. Heroin has been a problem. Okay? It's been a problem. It's been a problem. It's been a problem. My mother died 32 years ago of a heroin addiction at 26. It's been a problem. But it's only a problem now because the face of heroin is changing. So, there's collateral damage for mass incarceration. There is collateral damage for mass incarceration. So now you're a convicted felon. Okay, let's set this up, because this is how it looks. You're a convicted felon. So you're a convicted felon. Obviously, you can't take care of your children. You can't support your children. The wife has to go back, or the wife, the girlfriend, whoever, the paramour has to go back and forth. So you lose custody. That's what's going to happen. That's what happens. You're in jail. You can't fight for custody. You're of no physical use to your children. Come out. You know what? I want to start my life over. I want a chance. I don't want to go down that road. At this point, I'm one conviction under my belt. I would like to turn around. Guess what? The likelihood of that happening is no. You might get into a position, but you won't be there long. Unless the employer knows beforehand, and they have and you're coming through a program where they know you're a convicted felon. So the standard is not as high. So for the most part, employment, not an option. You need someplace to live. Where am I going? I'm coming out of jail where, I've been housed for 15, 14 years, 5 years, 6 years. I'm coming, where am I going? Where am I going to live? I want to go back with my family and with my children. But that's not always an option. Why? Because children and family may live in public housing. In public housing, if you have a conviction, you cannot have a felon in your house. Public housing, not an option. So now where are we? You know what? I finally, and a lot of convicted felons move to careers like truck driving and that kind of thing, because you can get by with a record in those kind of fields. Okay, I want to get my CDO. I'm going to try to do something with my life. Guess what? When you got locked up, well, first of all, when you lost custody, and if your partner was on public assistance, they put you on child support whether you were in jail or not. So when you weren't paying that child support, they suspended the license that you never even had. So now, no driver's license. Mind you, you still have VCCB fines. You have fines from the arrest. You have all these criminal justice fines, and you backed up arrears in child support. Baby mama's knocking. You just came home. You don't have anywhere to stay. You don't have any money. But you have all of these precious demands and responsibilities. So where are we now? You know what? I think I should go back to school and try to take up a trade. That's what I'll do. I'll take up a trade. However, when you go to apply for that financial aid and they ask you, have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime? Wow, my options are getting slim. This is the reality. I need you to see this because this is the reality of what you're dealing with. You know what? I can't get a regular job. I have a criminal record. Probably the best thing for me to do would be to try to start my own business. Do something for myself. Business loan, it's not happening. You know what? I really want to change the laws that govern this process. I really want my voice to be heard in the next election. I want to have some input into who I'm putting into office in my community. Really? You lost that right. When all else fails, what do we want to do? When all else fails and nothing else is working, we want to be able to go home. Reunification is not an option because if you reunify, and when she goes, if she happens to be on public assistance and she goes for recertification, they say, have you seen your baby's daddy? No. Because he needs some place to stay. She needs some place to stay. So instead of the family being bonded together and coming up with a plan to be able to survive and be able to help one another, she can't legally even see him or be with him. And her children can't legally live with their father. Reunification is not an option. So now what? This is the reality. So now what? When you're desperate and you're hopeless, you do anything. Because you have nothing to lose. You have nothing to lose. So when we talk about crime, we need to talk about crime in a real way. When we talk about what's going on in the inner cities, we need to talk about what's going on in the inner cities in a real way. But that's when you come in. You are empowered by this information. You are empowered to see the families that you work with and the young people that you're working with and those moms and those dads, to see them through a different lens once you can yourself have a better understanding of their plight. So what's the result of all of that? A permanent second class for millions of Americans, largely people of color. Why is this important? This is important because you are servicing these families. Continue. Let's be real. Can we have real conversation? I'm sorry. This is a real conference, right? Let's talk about it. The prison system is big business in America. It's big business. So don't look for your reform to come anytime soon. That's the reality. What we have to do as social workers, what we have to do as people in the field and people who are fighting against an unjust system, a system that has been shown to be flawed from top to bottom. We have to empower ourselves and empower one another. Because it's through your voice and your work that you're empowered to make change, to make real change, to make real change. Until mass incarceration is addressed, poverty is inevitable. So the war on poverty, that's what it really should be. It should be a war on poverty, not a war on drugs. Okay. So we all know what happened with the war on drugs, right? We know what the war on drugs did. The war on drugs really was really a war on black people. Is what it was. Let's call it what it was. It may not have been the intent because prior to, they had tried some things that weren't successful, but the government didn't nowhere near put as much money and effort into they did the war on drugs. Even though even then it was shown the disproportionate amount of pressure that was put on particular groups of people. We are still in those times. Inner city crime is a symptom of hopelessness and desperation, prompted by social and economic isolation. When you put people in a box, mentally, physically, psychologically, what do you expect them to do? How many of us in this room have been in a situation where we literally didn't know what we were going to eat or feed our families in that moment, in that day? How many times have you been in a situation where you had to do something that you ordinarily would not want to do to make ends meet for the day? When you're faced with those kind of questions, and that is your day-to-day reality, it's hard to think about anything else. One of the most difficult things to do in urban areas is to dream big. Because if what you see and what you are engrossed by on a daily, day-to-day basis is lack, poverty, desperation, drugs, you can't see what you never had. If grandma and great-grandma passed down to Section 8, you don't know what it's like to own a home. So we're asking people to do what we haven't equipped them to do or provided them to tools to do. We want you to be a productive citizen. We want you to make money. We want you to pay your taxes. We want you to take care of your kids. Okay, show me how to do that in a viable way. Because with everything we saw a couple of screens ago, I'm at a loss. Without a viable way out of poverty, blacks and Latinos will continue to be the bottom feeders of America. It is what it is, and there's no way around it. So we're at war on a lot of things, but we're not at war on the right things. Addiction. It is a known fact that given all of what I just talked about, there's an end of the rope for everyone. when you come to a point where you don't know how to cope, you don't have the skills to cope, because partly your mama didn't have the skills to cope, and neither did her mother. So it leads people more often than not down a path of addiction, because initially it's just an escape. We all know it doesn't turn out to be that way, but it's just an escape. So, as I stated earlier, I am from a family of addicts. Although my environment was chaotic and dysfunctional at best, had you removed me from it, I don't know what I would have done. Because I knew how to survive in my environment. I knew how to function in my environment. And I say that to say that we have to keep that in mind when we're taking kids out of the home. Because it may be dysfunctional to society's standard or even to your own standard. But for that kid, they know how to survive there. Unfortunately, my mother died when she was 26 of a heroin addiction. My father struggled with heroin all of my life. I'm an only child. One of my darkest memories is at about age 8. This is when their addiction was really prevalent, although I knew of it early on. I was so in tune and engrossed in their lifestyle because I was their only child. I did a lot with them. I went to New York, we went uptown, we bought drugs, we shoplift. I did everything with them. I knew what to do when they went in the store. I knew to hide the merchandise. I knew what to say to the cops. Taught, raised up. In a lot of ways, I think my mother was planning for her absence, because she taught me more about survival in the 9 years that she was in my life than I ever learned in school. I've probably gotten further on my common sense. But at 8, normal kid in school, late number of times, no one picked up on it. Then I'm looking for the cues. Lunchtime, I eat, I wait for the entire lunchroom to clear out. Why? Because I need to gather some of those lunches home and bring them home to feed my ailing parents who were in the bed, dope sick. At 8. If that is my reality, if that is my day to day, how can I worry about doing my homework? So, after I lost my mom, after my mom died, drugs for me became the enemy. And I talk about this in my book. I have an experience in my book where they had some dope on a sheet on something, and I saw it in the bathroom. And this scene is so vivid because it was just like me and the dope. And it was like, who was gonna win? What I was toying with in my mind is, do I flush it? But if I flush it, they're gonna be so upset. It was like me and the dope, which for a lot of people in urban areas, it does come to that. When you talk about trying to do something that has never been done. Like, I knew I wanted more, but I hadn't seen I knew there was a life outside of the one I was living, but I hadn't really seen it. So I'm engrossed in this lifestyle of drugs, of addiction. I lose my mom when I'm 9. My father, he lives, but he disappears from my life. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, takes me to live with her. I've been with her anyway for the most part. She has 4 sons. All of my uncles, big time hustlers. That's all they ever knew. Drug dealers. My role models, loved them to death because, again, they taught me how to survive. You can put me on the block or in the boardroom, I'm gonna make it. They taught me how to survive. And I watched them one by one get eaten up by that lifestyle, eventually losing all of them, with the exception of one. When you talk about addiction, addiction has real consequence. Because what we don't often talk about is the effect on the children. We talk about the addict and how we need to provide services and get help. And yeah, kids need counseling. But there is an immeasurable amount of damage done to the child coming through that home. And not enough time, resources, money, and energy is being spent with those children. But guess what? Those children grow up. And they grow up with all types of issues, social issues, all types of learning disabilities, all types of issues that when you talk to them in any real way, you'll know a lot of it stems from the brokenness at home. And because it's never addressed, what happens? They become a broken adult. And what happens with broken adults? They generally get with other broken adults and they have another bunch of broken babies. So when we talk about racial disparity, and we talk about poverty, and we talk about addiction, we have to have these conversations in a real way, in a meaningful way. So without brothers and sisters that got me, I mean, I had my uncles, but they were doing their thing, and by then I was doing mine. At 13, when I was 37 weeks pregnant, didn't even know it. I was on a field trip in Action Park, getting ready for my 8th grade graduation. And all of a sudden, my body started to swell. And they brought me from Action Park to Jersey City Medical Center. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks before they found out I was pregnant. Because then it's 87. Pregnancy is not the first thing coming to your head at that time. At this time, we got the kid already out. But then, no. So now I'm 13. Haven't had a mom since I was 9. My grandmother did the best she could. I knew my grandmother was an old soul. Okay, mama, that's all I needed. But now I'm 13, and I'm responsible now for rearing up someone else when I didn't have the tools myself. But that was my reality. And so I did the best I could with what I had. And I kept it moving, and I pushed that stroller to daycare. I did whatever I needed to do to get her what she needed and to keep me in school, because one thing for sure and 2 things for certain, I knew, like my mother's mother always told me, you stay in school no matter what. And I rode that thing till the lights came on. So by the time I was getting graduate school, because one of the caveats that she would always say, you stay in school. As long as you stay in school, I will help you. And I said, okay. So I tried a year out of the graduate program in psychology, and I don't like that. So then I went to Rutgers, and it took me 3 years to do that. So by the time I was finished, she was like, Okay, you done? Because you need a job. But I stayed in school. Remember, broken, damaged. So I'm coming through now, coming into my teen years. I'm in relationships where I've been battered, abused, and broken. But my spirit was never broken. Despite everything going on around me, and I wasn't even at the time, I'm a spiritual woman now, I love God. At the time, that wasn't my mentality. I didn't know God. I was too young to know, although my grandmother kept me in church, and I went to church, but of course, like most of us, when I got old enough to say, I don't want to go, I didn't go. But if you raise up a child in the way that they should go, they will always return to it. So I went through my years of crazy relationships, battered, abused, and broken, partying. But on Monday, I was in class. So to get from that point to point A to point Z in my environment, when you're living in a 2-bedroom apartment with about 22 people, is not easy. You're asking for nearly the impossible. So when we talk about race in America and we talk about poverty and addiction, we have to have the conversation in a real way. In a real way. I am the first in my family to do many things. So I graduated with high school, and initially, my motivation was the haters. Because at 13, when I was pushing that stroller, I could hear me coming, here come TT in that baby stroller. Yep. And I'm going to school, and I'm graduating. And every time I graduated, I felt like I had a badge of honor. So I kept graduating. So initially, my plight for success was to show people that you could. To show the people who said that because I didn't have parents in my life, because I come from a dysfunctional family, because I was surrounded by drugs and addiction and darkness, that because all of that was my reality, I was not going to be. And if you look at the numbers, if you look at the statistics, I'm not supposed to be. But I am the exception, not the rule. And what we need to do as a profession is we need to make it the rule. Because if you spark an interest in a child's life, and I'm going to tell you this, and I have a little bit more to go. If you spark an interest in a child's life, they will carry it. I had a 6th grade teacher who used to bring me to her house in Piscataway, showed me an area with no gates. I knew I wanted a home. If you spark an interest, they will follow. Let me wrap. So, vicious cycle, racial disparity, the Rockefeller drug laws, mass incarceration, broken families, addiction, generational dysfunctional, generational poverty is what we have, is what you're working against right now. What can you do as a social worker? What can you do? First of all, we have to acknowledge that societal, institutional, instructional maintenance of racism exists. We have to have these conversations in a real way. 2, we have to decrease influence of racism by bringing awareness to overt and covert actions. Don't act like you don't see it. You saw it like I saw it. You heard it. You read it. Refuse to participate in and or facilitate the systemic exclusion of anyone for any service. Most importantly, and I end here, most importantly, we need to challenge the powers that be to change racially disparaging laws and practices. We need to advocate to equally distribute access. We need to lobby to bring awareness and redirect resources to the underserved. Empower victims of oppression by using your position, your platform, and your privilege. With that, I thank you for your time. I did bring... Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Don't make me. I did good. Not dropping it here. Before I go, because I want to hear from Dr. Carl Hop myself. I didn't bring many books, but I bought a few. My story is best told in my book, Bird is in my backpack. If you are working in this business, I've always used my story as my own test family. It would do you a great service to purchase a book, and I will stay here till I sign every single copy. Thank you. God bless. Enjoy your afternoon.